America's Most Wanted debuted on Fox back in 1987. Since its inception, it has proven to be incredibly popular, even surviving a cancellation and a network move before being ultimately cancelled again in 2011. That was until 2021 when it was revived yet again. Over the years, the show has been directly responsible for tips that led to the arrest of hundreds of fugitives, some of them extremely high profile. Number 10. The First Crime. David James Roberts was the man who proved just how important a show America's Most Wanted could be. He was the first criminal that was pulled in after being featured on the show, and also the first criminal to be featured on the show. It was 1988 when Roberts was on the show for a crime he had committed back in 1974. Roberts had committed rape, murder, and arson. He had set a house ablaze with a couple and their 3-year-old child inside. It took only 4 days after his profile on the show for Roberts to be captured. Over 1,000 tips were called in. Number 9. Kevin Fuller. In what had to be one of the most unusual tips called in after an episode of America's Most Wanted, prison escapee Kevin Fuller actually called law enforcement himself to try to explain that things weren't as bad as the show made it seem. Fuller had been arrested for bank robbery and ended up breaking out of a medium security facility. According to him, he had to leave to have a medical condition treated that the prison just wasn't addressing. In contrast to his claim that he was just having a medical condition treated, police said that during his free time he also strangled a bus driver, robbed a bank, and also a convenience store. All of that in the week it took police to catch up with him again. He ended up being sentenced to 16 years in prison. Number 8. Marc Clifton Bryant. Life without parole was the sentence for Marc Clifton Bryant after an appearance on America's Most Wanted led to his capture at a Golden Corral restaurant. Bryant was convicted for the brutal torture of a teenage girl and trying to brand her with the word liar on her forehead with a screwdriver and a blowtorch. Then he tried to choke her and drown her in a bathtub. He committed his crime in 2004 but wasn't convicted until 2009. Initially, he had been friends with the girl's mum and developed an obsession with the 16-year-old. He came to believe that she had a boyfriend and then branded her as a part of the torture. At his trial, the judge called out his brutality and sentenced him to consecutive terms for each count that he was charged with. Number 7. Margaret DeFrancisco. In one of the most brutal and baffling cases that America's Most Wanted ever helped close, Margaret DeFrancisco and her sister were arrested for the murder of trucker Oscar Velasquez. Velasquez had dated DeFrancisco's sister, but the pair chose to rob him sometime later and then shot him. They lured him to their house, got him in the basement, and put a bullet in the back of his head. DeFrancisco was only 16 at the time. The sisters robbed him, took the man's body from the house, dumped it in an empty lot, and then doused it in nail polish remover before lighting him on fire. In an effort to skirt the law, she went on the run with her sister, leaving their native Chicago. After America's Most Wanted aired an episode about them, DeFrancisco cut a tattoo off her own body in an effort to make herself less recognizable. An anonymous tip after the episode aired led to DeFrancisco's capture. Lawyers tried to argue the killing was in self-defense, but it didn't work. She was sentenced to 46 years in prison. Number 6. Stephen Ray Stout. Back in 1988, Stephen Ray Stout murdered his own mother-in-law and one of her daughters. He had gotten into a fight with his mother-in-law and recalled that she had slapped him in the face. Later, after he was caught, he said he couldn't remember committing the crimes. According to the forensic evidence, he beat and then stabbed his mother-in-law to death before turning on her 18-year-old daughter, the sister of his ex-wife. She was also beaten, stabbed, and then strangled. After the murders, he stole his mother-in-law's car and fled, leaving the state and taking up a new identity. Later that same year, his case aired on America's Most Wanted. He was living with a woman at the time who actually watched the episode and confronted him, asking if he was the man featured. He says he was, and she turned him in. Number 5. Nell Carter. Nell Carter had one of the fastest turnarounds of any criminal added to the FBI's Most Wanted list and then broadcast on America's Most Wanted. Carter had killed a woman in 1986 and wounded 2 others after going on what was described as a shooting spree. The death was the result of a romantic feud that got out of control. Police actually arrested Carter shortly after the crimes, but inexplicably let him go by mistake 8 days later. He was on the run for nearly 3 years before he was found again. America's Most Wanted aired an episode about him at 8 p.m. The FBI put him on the Most Wanted list at 9 p.m. and he was in police custody by 11 p.m. Number 4. Wardell David Ford. Some criminals try to think big, and Wardell David Ford was one of them. His crime was meant to be an action movie-style heist involving an armored car robbery. Things didn't go as planned, however. Ford and his best friend, David Temple, rolled up in an armored car in Detroit back in 1983. They pulled guns on the guards, and Ford proceeded to lift $45,000 from the car. Temple and the guards got into a scuffle as the guard pulled his own gun. The 2 men wrestled over the weapons, and Ford just started firing, killing both of them. In 1990, America's Most Wanted aired an episode about the case, and law enforcement received tips that Ford Ford was working on the docks. He was arrested and given a life sentence for his crimes. Number 3. Tony Ray Amati. Back in 1996, Amati and 2 accomplices robbed a gun store in Las Vegas. The 3 of them made off with 75 firearms and chose to celebrate their haul by going on a vicious shooting spree through town. 3 total strangers were killed by Amati, their bodies shot over 20 times apiece with a variety of weapons. For all intents and purposes, it just seems like Amati was trying out the guns that he'd stolen to see how well they worked, and he chose human targets to do it. Amati had posted bail after his initial arrest and then vanished. It was about a year and a half later when he was finally found again, thanks to his story being featured on America's Most Wanted. Despite the fact that he'd changed his hair color and was working in Georgia, an anonymous tip after the show led police to him. Number 2. Eric Rosser. It's terrifying to think of the lengths that former John Cougar Mellencamp piano player Eric Rosser went to in order to escape justice. The first pedophile to be placed on the FBI's Most Wanted list, Rosser had committed a slew of sex crimes involving children. He fled the United States and was on the run for over a year while authorities tried to track him down. During his time abroad, he used 3 different passports to travel through Europe and Asia. He got liposuction and other cosmetic procedures to try and alter his appearance and hide from law enforcement. After appearing on America's Most Wanted, law enforcement was flooded with tips from all over the world, 53 countries in fact. But it was in Thailand where he was found, his apartment full of more evidence of his crimes, including photos and videos. While there, he had been working as a soloist with the Bangkok Symphony and providing piano lessons for Thai children. He was extradited to the US where he served 16 years in prison. He was released in 2017. Number 1. John List. In 1971, John List killed his entire family. The accountant, who looked like the stereotypical accountant and seemed mild-mannered to everyone who knew him, had been faking going to work for months beforehand. Every day, he packed a lunch and headed out to catch the train to the office. In reality, he'd spend all day in the parking lot. He had been fired from his job and chose to hide that fact from his wife, Helen, and their children, as well as his mother, who had invited to live with them in the 18-room mansion that he'd purchased thinking his high-profile job would last. List was apparently a religious man. His kids were teens now, and they were being corrupted by the world of the late 60s and early 70s. His wife had admitted to him that she had contracted an STD from her first husband and it had not been treated. She stopped going to church and started drinking. So List killed them all. His reason? To ensure they'd go to heaven. He killed his wife over breakfast after the kids went to school, then killed his mother. Then he waited the entire day for the kids to come home, first killing his 16-year-old daughter and then one of his sons. Then he drove to his 3rd son's soccer game, watched him play, and then drove home and murdered him too. List went about staging a meticulous and exhaustive cover-up. He told the school his kids were leaving the state to be with their sick grandmother. He cashed in saving bonds, closed all bank accounts, ended mail and newspaper delivery, and literally cut his face out of every photo in the house so no one could put him on a wanted poster. And then he vanished. It was over a month before anyone even began to wonder where the family went, since they'd been so thorough in explaining their absence to anyone. The teacher went to investigate and neighbors called the police because they saw someone creeping about the property. When they entered the house, they found all 5 bodies. It would be 18 years before anyone would see List again, or at least know that they'd seen him. The man had started a new life and even remarried. In 1989, America's Most Wanted aired an episode about List and included an image of what they thought he might look like after 18 years. The image was enough to make one of List's neighbors call the police. He was arrested and convicted, and he died in prison in 2008. So I really hope you found this video interesting. If you want to hear even more crimes that have popped up on America's Most Wanted, or really anywhere in the media, then you might want to consider checking out my true crime podcast, The Casual Criminalist. For your convenience, it's both a podcast and a YouTube channel. You can get it either way or both ways, whatever you like. There are all kinds of links in the description below. Thank you for watching.